Sylvia Marie Likens, January 3, 1949 to October 26, 1965, was an American teenager who was tortured and murdered by her caregiver, Gertrude Baniszewski, many of Baniszewski's children, and several of their neighborhood friends. The abuse lasted for 3 months, occurring incrementally, before Likens died from her extensive injuries and malnourishment on October 26, 1965, in Indianapolis, Indiana. Likens was increasingly tormented, neglected, belittled, sexually humiliated, beaten, starved, lacerated, burned, and dehydrated by her tormentors. Her autopsy showed 150 wounds across her body, including several burns, scald marks and eroded skin. Through intimidation, her younger sister, Jenny, was occasionally forced to participate in her mistreatment. The official cause of her death was determined to be a homicide caused by a combination of subdural hematoma and shock, complicated by severe malnutrition. Gertrude Baniszewski, her oldest daughter, Paula, her son, John, and 2 neighborhood youths, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were all tried and convicted in May 1966 of neglecting, torturing, and murdering Likens. At the defendant's trial, Deputy Prosecutor Leroy New described the case as the most diabolical case to ever come before a court or jury, in Gertrude's defense. Attorney, William C. Becker, described Likens as having been subjected to acts of degradation that you wouldn't commit on a dog before her death. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gertrude Baniszewski guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment but was released on parole in 1985. Paula was found guilty of second-degree murder and was released in 1972. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John were found guilty of manslaughter and served less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being granted parole on February 27, 1968. The torture and murder of Sylvia Likens is widely regarded as one of the worst crimes in Indiana history and has been described by a senior investigator in the Indianapolis Police Department as the most sadistic case he had ever investigated in the 35 years he served with the Indianapolis Police. Gertrude Nadine Baniszewski, née Van Fossen, September 19, 1928 to June 16, 1990, was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, to Hugh Marcus Van Fossen Sr. and Molly Myrtle, née Oakley, both of whom were originally from Illinois and were of English and Dutch descent. Baniszewski was the third of 6 children, and her family was working class. On October 5, 1939, Baniszewski saw her 50-year-old father die from a sudden heart attack. 6 years later, she dropped out of high school at age 16 to marry 18-year-old John Stephen Baniszewski, 1926, 2007, who was originally from Youngsville, Pennsylvania, and was of Polish ancestry, and with whom she had 4 children. Although John Baniszewski had a volatile temper and occasionally beat his wife, the two remained together for 10 years prior to their divorce. Following her divorce, Baniszewski married a man named Edward Guthrie. This marriage lasted just 3 months before the couple divorced. Shortly thereafter, Baniszewski remarried her first husband, W.I., whom she had 2 more children. The couple divorced for the second time in 1963. Weeks after her third divorce, Baniszewski began a relationship with a 20-year-old welder named Dennis Lee Wright, who also physically abused her. She had 1 child with Wright, Dennis Lee Wright Jr. Shortly after the birth of their son in May 1964, Wright abandoned Baniszewski. Shortly thereafter, Baniszewski filed a paternity suit against Wright F. financial support of their child, but Rig seldom contributed to the care of their son. By 1965, Baniszewski lived alone with her 7 children: Paula, 17, Stephanie, 15, John, 12, Marie, 11, Shirley, 10, James, 8, and Dennis Lee Wright Jr. 1. Although 36 years old and 5 feet 6 inches 168 centimeters in height, she weighed only 100 pounds 45 kilograms, and has been described as a haggard, underweight asthmatic chain smoker suffering from clinical depression due to the stress of 3 failed marriages, a failed relationship, and a recent miscarriage. In addition to the sporadic checks she received from her first husband, a former Indianapolis policeman, whom she primarily relied financially to support her children, Baniszewski occasionally Performed odd jobs for neighbors and acquaintances, such as sewing or cleaning in order to earn money. Baniszewski resided in Indianapolis at 3850 East New York Street, where the monthly rent was $55. 12. Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Marie Likens, January 3, 1949 to October 26, 1965, was the third of 5 children born. Carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens (1926–2013) and his wife, Elizabeth Betty Frances née Grimes, 1927–1998. She was born between 2 sets of fraternal twins, Daniel and Diana, 2 years older than her, and Benny and Jenny, 1 year younger. Jenny Likens suffered from polio, causing one of her legs to be weaker than the other. She was afflicted with a notable L and had to wear a steel brace on one leg. Lester and Elizabeth's marriage was unstable. They often sold candy, beer, and soda at carnival stands around Indiana throughout the summer, moving frequently and regularly, experiencing severe financial difficulties. The Likens' sons regularly traveled with them in to assist with their job, but Sylvia and Jenny were discouraged from doing the same, out of concern for their safety and education. As a result, both sisters frequently stayed with their relatives, often their grandmother. In her teenage years, Sylvia Likens occasionally earned spending money by babysitting, running errands, or performing ironing chores for friends and neighbors, often giving her mother part of her earnings. She has been described as a friendly, confident, and lively girl, with long, light brown hair extending below her shoulders, and was known as Cookie to her friends. Sylvia, left, and Jenny, right, pictured with 3 friends in Long Beach, California, on Easter Sunday, 1965. Although exuberant, Likens always kept her mouth closed when smiling due to a missing front game. She was also fond of music, particularly the Beatles, and was notably protective of her markedly more timid and insecure younger sister. On several occasions, the 2 sisters would visit a local skating rink, where Sylvia would help Jenny skate by holding her hand, while Jenny skated on her unaffected foot. July 1965. By June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny Likens resided with their parents in Indianapolis. On July 3, their mother was arrested and subsequently jailed for shoplifting. Shortly thereafter, Lester Likens arranged for his daughters to board with Gertrude Baniszewski, the mother of 2 girls with whom the sisters had recently become acquainted while studying at Arsenal Technical High School, Paula and Stephanie Baniszewski. At the time of this boarding agreement, Gertrude assured Lester she would care for his daughters until his return as if they were her own children. Shortly after the 4th of July holiday, the sisters moved into 3850 East New York Street in order for their father and, later, their mother to travel to the East Coast with the carnival, with the understanding that Gertrude would receive weekly boarding fees of $20 to care for their daughters until they returned to collect Sylvia and Jenny in November of that year. During the initial weeks in which Sylvia and Jenny resided at the Baniszewski household, the sisters were subjected to very little discipline or abuse. Likens regularly sang along to pop records with Stephanie, and she willingly participated in housework at the Baniszewski residence. Both girls also regularly attended Sunday school with the Baniszewski children, with the pastor commending Sylvia's piety. Although Lester Likens had agreed to pay Gertrude Baniszewski $20 a week in exchange for the care of his daughters, after approximately 2 weeks, these payments failed to consistently arrive upon the prearranged dates, occasionally arriving 1 or 2 days late. In response, Gertrude began venting her frustration at this fact upon the sisters by beating their bare buttocks with various implements, such as a 1/4 inch thick, 6.4 mm paddle, making statements such as, "Well, I took care of you 2 little bitches for a week for nothing." On one occasion, in late August, both girls were beaten approximately 15 times on the back with the aforementioned paddle, after Paula had accused the sisters of eating too much food at a church supper the household children had attended. By mid-August, Gertrude Baniszewski had begun to focus her abuse almost exclusively upon respectability and potential. According to subsequent trial testimony, this abuse was initially inflicted upon Sylvia, after she and Jenny had returned to the Baniszewski residence Fr. Arsenal Technical High School, as well as on weekends. This initial abuse included subjecting Likens to beatings and starvation, forcing her to eat leftovers or spoiled food out of garbage, cans. On one occasion, Likens was accused of stealing candy she had actually purchased. On another occasion, in late August, Likens was subjected to humiliation when she claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach, whom she had met in the spring of 1965 when her family lived in California. In response, Gertrude asked if Sylvia had ever done anything with a boy, to which Likens, unsure of her meaning, replied, "I guess so," and explained that she had gone skating with boys there, and had once gone to a park on the beach with them. Continuing the conversation with Jenny and Stephanie, Sylvia mentioned that she had once lain under the covers with her boyfriend. Upon hearing this, Gertrude asked, "Why did you do that, Sylvia?" Likens replied, "I don't know," and shrugged. Several days later, Gertrude returned to the subject, with Likens telling her, "You're certainly getting big in the stomach, Sylvia. It looks like you're going to have a baby." Likens thought Gertrude was kidding with her and said, "Yeah, it sure is getting big. I'm just going to have to go on a diet." Gertrude then told her, and the other girls in the house, that whenever they did something with a boy, they would be sure to have a baby. She then kicked Likens in the genitals. Paula, herself 3 months pregnant, and also jealous of Likens's physical appearance, then participated in attacking Likens, knocking her off her chair and onto the kitchen floor, shouting, "You ain't fi. Sit in a chair." On another occasion, as the family ate supper, Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Gordon Lepper force-fed Likens a hot dog overloaded with condiments, including mustard and spices. Likens vomited as a result, and was later forced to consume what she had regurgitated. In what was Likens's only act of retaliation, she is alleged to have spread a rumor at Arsenal Technical High School that Stephanie and Paula Baniszewski were prostitutes because she was upset with the household singling her out for similar accusations. While at school, Stephanie was jokingly propositioned by a boy who told her that Likens had started this rumor about her. Upon returning home that day, Stephanie questioned Likens about the rumor and she admitted to starting it. Stephanie punched her in response, but Likens apologized to her, in tears, and Stephanie then also began to cry. However, when Stephanie's boyfriend, 15-year-old Coy Randolph Hubbard, heard of the rumor, he brutally attacked Likens, slapping her, banging her head against the wall and flipping her backwards onto the floor. Gertrude found out. She used a paddle to beat Likens. 36. On another occasion, Paula beat Likens about the face with such force that she broke her own wrist, having primarily focused her blows upon Likens's teeth and eyes. Later, Paula used the cast on her wrist to further beat Likens. Gertrude repeatedly falsely accused Likens of promiscuity and of engaging in prostitution, ranting about the filthiness of prostitution a women in general. Gertrude would later occasionally force Jenny to strike her own sister, beating Jenny if she did not comply. Coy Hubbard and several of his classmates frequently visited the Baniszewski residence to both physically and verbally torment Likens, often collaborating with Baniszewski's children and Gertrude herself. With Gertrude's active encouragement, these neighborhood children routinely beat Likens, sometimes using her as a practice dummy in violent judo sessions, lacerating her body, burning her skin with lit cigarettes in excess of 100 times, and severely injuring her genitals. To entertain Gertrude and her teenage accomplices, Likens was forced at one point to strip naked in the family living room and penetrate herself with a glass Pepsi bottle in their presence, with Gertrude stating to all present that this act of humiliation was for Sylvia to prove to Jenny what kind of a girl you are. Gertrude eventually forbade Likens from attending school after she confessed to having stolen a gym suit from the school due to Gertrude having refused to purchase the clothing for her. For this act of theft, Gertrude whipped Likens with a 3-inch wide, 7.6 centimeters police belt. Gertrude then switched her conversation to the evils of premarital sex before repeatedly kicking Likens in the genitals as Stephanie rallied to Likens's defense, shouting, "She didn't do anything." Gertrude then burned Likens's fingertips with matches before further whipping he. A few days later, Gertrude repeatedly whipped Jenny with the police belt after she reportedly stole a single tennis shoe from the school to wear on her strong foot. Turmoil. The Likens siblings were afraid of notifying either family members or adults at their school of the steepening domestic tumult, as both were afraid that doing so would only worsen their situation. Jenny, in particular, struggled against the urge to notify family members, as she had been threatened by Gertrude that she would herself be abused and tortured to the same degree as her sister if she did so. Jenny was also subjected to bullying by girls in her neighborhood, in addition to occasionally being ridiculed or beaten whenever she alluded to Sylvia's situation. In July and August, both Lester and Elizabeth Likens would occasionally return to Indianapolis to visit their daughters, whenever their travel schedule afforded them the opportunity. The last occasion Lester and Elizabeth visited their daughters was on October 5. On this occasion, neither girl exhibited any visible sign of distress about their mistreatment to their parents. This was likely because both were in the presence of Gertrude and her children. Almost immediately after Lester and Elizabeth had left the Baniszewski household on their final visit, Gertrude turned to F.A. Likens and stated, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia? Now they're gone." On one occasion in September, the girls encountered their older sister, Diana Shoemaker, at a local park. Both Jenny and Sylvia informed Diana about the abuse they were enduring at the hands of their caregiver, adding that Sylvia was being specifically targeted for physical abuse, almost always for things she had neither said nor done. Neither sister mentioned the actual address where they resided and, initially, Diana believed her sisters must have been exaggerating their claims regarding the scope of their mistreatment. 55 and 7. Several weeks prior to this, Sylvia and Jenny had encountered Diana in the same park, while in the company of 11-year-old Marie Baniszewski, and Sylvia had been given a sandwich to eat. When she mentioned to her sister that she was hungry, Likens remained silent about the matter, although Marie revealed this fact to her family in late September. In response, Gertrude accused Likens of engaging in gluttony before she and Paula choked and bludgeoned her. The pair then subjected Likens to a scalding bath in order to cleanse her of sin, with Gertrude grabbing Likens's hair and repeatedly banging her head against the bath to revive her whenever she fainted. Shortly after this incident, the father of a neighborhood boy named Michael John Monroe phoned Arsenal Technical High School to anonymously report that a girl with open sores across her entire body was living at the Baniszewski household. As Likens had not attended school for several days, a school nurse visited East New York Street to investigate these claims. Gertrude claimed to the nurse that Likens had run away from her home the previous week and that she was unaware of her actual whereabouts, adding that Likens was out of control, and that her open sores were a result of Likens's refusal to maintain decent personal hygiene. Gertrude further claimed that Likens was a bad influence on both her own children and her sister. School made no further investigations concerning Likens's welfare. The immediate neighbors of the Baniszewski family were a middle-aged couple named Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion. Both initially viewed Gertrude as an ideal caregiver for the Likens sisters, and both had visited the Baniszewski residence on 2 occasions while the girls had been under Gertrude's care. On both occasions, however, the Vermillions witnessed Paula physically abusing Likens, who on both occasions had a black eye, and openly boasting about her mistreatment of the child to them. Upon their second visit to the Baniszewski household, both observed Likens to appear extremely meek and somewhat zombified in nature. Nevertheless, the Vermillions never reported Likens's evident mistreatment to the authorities. On or about October 1, Diana Shoemaker discovered that her sisters were at the Baniszewski residence. She visited the property in an attempt to initiate regular contact. Gertrude, however, refused to allow Diana entry to the property, stating that she had received permission from their parents not to allow either of the girls to see her. She then ordered Diana to leave the property. Approximately 2 weeks later, Diana encountered Jenny, by chance, close to the home and inquired as to Sylvia's welfare. She was informed, "I can't tell you or I'll get into trouble." Escalation. Due to the increase in the frequency and brutality of the torture and mistreatment Likens was subjected to, she gradually became incontinent. She was denied any access to the bathroom, being forced to wet herself. As a form of punishment for her incontinence, on October 6, Gertrude threw Likens into the basement and tied her up. Here, Likens was often kept naked, rarely fed, and frequently deprived of water. Occasionally, she was tied to the railing of the basement stairs with her feet barely touching the ground. In the weeks prior to locking Likens in the family basement, Gertrude had increasingly abused and tormented Likens. She would occasionally falsely claim to the children in her household that either she, herself, or one of them had been receiving direct insults from Likens in the hope this would provoke them into belittling or attacking her. On one occasion, Gertrude held a knife aloft and challenged Likens to fight me back, to which Likens replied she did not know how fight. In response, Gertrude inflicted a light scour wound to Likens's leg. Physical and mental torment such as this would occasionally pause when the Baniszewskis watched their favorite television shows. Neighborhood children were also occasionally charged 5 cents apiece to see the display of Likens's body and to humiliate, beat, scald, burn, and, ultimately, mutilate her. Throughout Likens's captivity in the basement, Gertrude, frequently, with the assistance of her children and neighborhood children, restrained and gagged Likens before placing her in a bathtub filled with scalding water and proceeding to rub salt in her wounds. On one occasion, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., rubbed urine and feces from Gertrude's 1-year-old son's diaper into Likens's mouth, before giving her a cup half-filled W.I. water and stating the water was all she would receive for the remainder of the day. On October 22, John Baniszewski Jr. tormented Likens by offering to allow her to eat a bowl of soup with her fingers and then quickly taking away the bowl when Likens, by this stage suffering from extreme malnourishment, attempted to eat the food. Gertrude Baniszewski eventually allowed Likens to sleep upstairs, on the condition that she learned not to wet herself. That night, Sylvia whispered to Jenny to secretly give her a glass of water before falling asleep. The following morning, Gertrude discovered that Likens had urinated on herself. As a punishment, Likens was forced to insert an empty glass Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina in the presence of the Baniszewski children before Gertrude ordered her into the basement.